This lesson is going to deal with the structure of the bone and their numerous parts and what their functions may be. Um, in this previous slide, we deal with diseases and fractures and things that can happen to you over time if you like osteoporosis and arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. Um, but this is basically the structure and how we develop and grow. So let's get on to it. This is some of the functions of the bones. They support. It's something for our muscles, and it provides us to have movement in our life. And how this occurs is that the muscles are with tendons are pivoted off of our joints onto the sound structure of the bones, and it gives us a pivoting point where we can bend our elbows and move, and then we can bear the pressure with the assistance of our muscles, and to allow us to apply force and move. So movement and anchorage is important to our muscles, as you stated here. It's a mineral storage. It's calcium and phosphorus. That's very important. The calcium levels deal with the contractibility of our muscles and their forcefulness. For example, the heart, if it has lacks calcium, it's going to have a movement of very uh, not as forceful. But if you have calcium, the force is stronger and it beats with a more of a forceful beat. So it's important to understand the importance of the minerals in our body and how it reacts to our tissue to get responses from. Then you have hemomatosis. Now this is the making of blood cells, red blood cells, and as you can see, it's in the long bones, differentiation into various places. And I'll discuss it a little further as we go along as well because it's a pretty important function. So let's go into the now. Many of these things will be focused on the slides that are fixing to come before you. But I've always liked to discuss function with an illustration. So I'm going to come over. I'm going to discuss some of the functions of these different parts of the long bone. The long bone are one of the 5 different types of bones found in the human body. They contain a curved shaft that is unique for its strength. Um, these are found in the arms, legs, fingers, and toes. Um, the long bone consists of 3 distinct parts: the epiphysis, the metaphysis, and the diaphysis. Um, on the articular portion of the epiphysis, uh, you can see it at the top part of the picture there of our long bone is a type of cartilage that we call the hyaline cartilage. Uh, this helps uh, the bone and the joints to connect. The hyaline cartilage is up there at the articular cartilage. You see that right there at the epiphyseal growth line. And then you have the articular cartilage. That's where you have the hyaline cartilage at, and allows us to connect to the adjacent bones that this joint may affix to. Now that you have the epiphysis, which is the proximal, which is the top, right, and distal, which means below. So there's a little bit of that anatomy for you, right? Proximal is closer to the body, and distal is away from the body. So there you have the proximal epiphysis and the distal epiphysis. Uh, the long bone. It's made up of a type of bone that we all are spongy and callous bone. This region resembles a honeycomb and contains many cross sections. And this is why the spongy bone is also called the tubercular bone. Spongy bone is not very dense and contains the red blood or red bone marrow, and is involved in the hemopatosis that we discussed in the earlier slide, the making of red blood cells. Um, then you'll see a little line there. There's a little line that's very thin. It's called the metaphase. The metaphase contains a region of hyaline cartilage. Uh, it, it's like an epiphyseal plate in children and young adults. This is where the bone grows and elongates via the process of osteoblasts. And when we become adults at age 25, this plate stops growing and becomes the epithelial line. So this metaphase portion is very active in young adults all the way up to age 25 and growing. So then it becomes basically a line, an elongation line, and we call it the epiphyseal line. So the long shaft region of the bone is called the diaphase, the long shaft there. This contains the manual cavity, marrow cavity, which is the innermost part of the bone. Next to that is the compact bone, also called the cortical bone, that contains yellow bone marrow that stores adipose tissue. Compact bone is very dense and gives the bone its high strength. Compact bone consists of osterones. Osterones are very strong structures. They bond with each other. Then you have the endothelium, is the inner covering of the bone, while the peristerium is the membranes covering found on the outermost portion of the bone. The peristemium protects the bone and serves as an attachment site for muscles, the tendons. It also contains cells that can differentiate into osteoblasts, which allow repair of the bone if it becomes injured or under stressful conditions. So it's important to kind of remember that the bone has some pretty unique functions. It's got red blood cells. It grows in length to up to a certain age. It provides strength and structure for our muscles to pivot on so we can have movement. Um, it provides osteoblast for self-repair in case of an injury. So it's a pretty unique and very useful thing to have. Other than that, would be an amoeba, right? I don't know if you know what an amoeba is, but some of you do. So we'll go to the next slide. I'll just spend a short amount of time. This deals with the materials that are making up the bone. The osteocytes are mature bone cells, so they have to be developed, and they're basically underneath a microscope. You can see them as being kind of like if you ever seen a plant cell where they're encapsulated and they've got structures and knitting going on, and um, it's pretty unique to see. It's like catacombs, basically. Then you have the organic material, which is collagen, which is a flexible, uh, spongy-like material, and then you have jelly-like material as well. That is also part. This is where the gets you your flexibilities in your bones at your joints, so you can pivot and move them without causing damage to the hard structures. Then the inorganic material, 65% hardness, durability. So so most of the bone is hard, which is 65%, and 35% is the jelly-like collagen, movable flexibility at your joint connections, and things like that. So we covered these pretty in-depthly at the illustration slide. I covered diaphase as well, and the fact that it was a hollow cylinder, a compact bone. And I did this function. I discovered that I told you what that was. The epiphysis is the growth area. The growth area is the metaphase, right? The metaphasal area that we saw in the illustration. Uh, it's covered by articulated cartilage, which is the hyaline cartilage that I discussed earlier at the where you have a joining of two bones. Um, and then you have the epiphyseal growth, which is the plate that occurs after the growth spurt has occurred, meaning usually after the age of 25. And the center is the medulla canal via the elbow. I discussed that already. The endosperm lining of the marrow channel, and the Havison canal carries blood vessels that nourish the bone cells. So when you break your bone, you bleed, guys. The red marrow is located in the spongy part of the bone, is with the epiphysis region. It's honeycomb and contains many cross links. Um, the spongy bone is not very dense, and it contains red bone marrow, which produces blood cells in the process of hematopoiesis. So that's the making of red blood cells. Then you have the periosteum, a tough fibrous tissue covering the outer outside of the bone. And that's where I told you about the osteoblast can occur if there's an injury to the bone, so that it can rebuild its structure and reform them and repair. So it's very important. It's like it says, repair and nutrition. I discussed earlier about the growth process, the metaphase portion of the bone, and up to the age limits required for that. But ossify is the hardening of the center out from the center and outward that makes our bones very strong and stiff. Now, osteoblast, I also mentioned that osteoblast is dealt with the repairing of damaged tissue and discovered on the outside portion of the peripheral area of the shaft of the bones. But there's another one that I did not mention is the osteoclast. Whenever you break a bone, um, the osteoclasts get to work. They just start making new deposits of new bone, and they're not necessarily the greatest sculptors in the world, and it gets misshapen. The formation is not exactly sound or smooth, uh, and can be kind of rough. It's kind of like building a brick wall into a big pile, so to speak. Uh, it doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason. Well, the osteoclasts come in and they secrete enzymes and break down these osteoblast new bone formations and basically sculpture the formation to be useful and in the repair. So they kind of work together. Osteoclast is very cool and unique, and it prevents our muscle tissue from going over rough areas of repaired bones or broken bone and becoming damaged and tore up, because the osteoclast will smooth out the osteoblast rough deposits of bone. This is the growth of bones. We covered this. The epicele. What that means is the cartilage is known as the growth plate. The epicele is like, once again, it's not visual because until it stopped growing, uh, but it's visual as the metaphase during the growth time, during the growth period. And once you're an adult or you stop growing, the epicele plate is visible. Um, Females grow up to the age of 18 years of age. That's pretty much solid, but I have a conflict with this particular slide on the growth of males. Um, Now, there's been a lot of input put into that recently, and that males are not fully developed chronologically. That means they're cerebral. We can't think, okay? In case you don't know. Young men make foolish mistakes, and you often wonder why. Well, their mental capacity is not fully developed, and guess what? They're still growing. Um, so there's a lot of debate on that, and a lot of my research says it's up to age 25. But in your textbook, you may be held and challenged to the age of 20 to 21. But I can tell you, I've seen a lot of young men that are 21 years old and look like they've got a lot of growing to do uh, before they stop. So I'm sure if you look around, you'll notice that as well. Um, they look like they're going to uh, have a growth spurt or two left in them, and they most likely do. Here we have bone types. The long bones, such as the femur, are longer than they are wide, and I want to say that's the largest bone that we have. You have the short bones, uh, and they're in your wrists and ankles, as it says here, but such as the carpals or carpals, our carpals in our wrist. They're approximately equal in length and width and thickness. So they're kind of like a little square. They're like length, width, and thickness. They're all a little bitty bones that interlink to each other to form things. Then you have the flat bones. They're thin but are often curved, such as our ribs. Um, and our irregular bones are those of the face and have no characteristic shape. Um, so that's the differences between these. Uh, See how they get the flat bones, several bones of the skull and ribs. Um, so that's interesting to know that what their purposes are. So we'll go on to the next slide. have they divided the skeletal system into two major areas. Axial is basically remove your arms and legs, and there you go. You have the thoracic perineal area without the legs attached, and then you have your skull and bones, the cephalic brain head. The hyoid bone in the neck is the only bone in the body that does not have an articulate with any other bone, so it's basically surrounded by soft tissue. So that, if I was to give you a test question, that might just be on it because that's very unique. Now, appendages. Look at that. Appendages, appendicular skeleton. That means our arms and our legs. So it kind of tells you what I am, right? So that's important to kind of remember that clue about appendage, right? Appendicular skeletal. So as you can see, this is an illustration of the skull. Uh, you have the temporal bone, the parietal bone, the frontal bone, the maxillary, the mandible, um, and there's the exagamic bone, which is your cheeks coming out this way. Um, so the important thing about this is basically learn the structures, learn the anatomy, and if you can't memorize what the anatomy is, then know where to go to find it. I mean, if we ask you to find and name this particular bone, uh, let's say it's the earthmoid bone. You notice that it's just on the inner side rim of the eye. Um, so it's important to understand this location. Don't get it mixed up with the nasal bone or the lacrimal bone where you cry. This is a little further down. The earthmoid bone is down a little bit further from that, and the lacrimal bone is where the tear duct's at. It's just on the inner part of the eye. So then you have you have the various areas, the maxillary, the mandible, um, the zygomatic bone, which is a nice, funny word to say. And so you can imagine that professors would probably choose that one because it's just a big Z word. How many often do you get a chance to use a Zulu word, right? Zygomatic bone. You have the frontal, parietal. Basically, it's just getting familiar with the location of these different areas of the skull so that you can easily find them and correctly identify them on an illustration from a multiple choice list. So let's go to the next one. This is an illustration of the vertebra or the spinal column. As you can see in the very middle of the illustration on the left hand side, you have these T's and L's there, and the C's at the very top. So you have the cervical, right? And notice they're numbered. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 C's, right? C1, C2, C3, C4, C5. So you can understand that the spinal cord is broken down mainly into these different various sections. Cervical, you have the thoracic area, T1, T2, T3, etc. And you go all the way to T12. I believe that's a T12. Yep, T12. And then you have the lumbar area, and it's an L1, L2, etc. And then you have the sacrum, and then the coccyx that follows that. So as you can see, those are basically you will have to know that anatomy and where to find these C1, C2, C3, T1. Notice the illustration right in the middle of that one on the left. Now you have the same basic areas identified in the curved one, but it's a side view of the spinal cord as well, and it pretty much tells you where the cartilages are. The first lumbar vertebra, it distinguishes that. The first thoracic vertebra distinguishes that, and the second cervical vertebra axis is illustrated as well. So you got the first one as well at the top. So that kind of helps you. Then it's divided into the same four groups, right? The cervical region, the thoracic region, lumbar, and then the sacral occipital region, or the coccyx area. So this distinguishes your appendages, your appendicular appendage, right? The appendages. the skeleton, your upper arm. The shoulder girdle has two clavicles, right? Right here, two clavicles, and two scapula in the back, right there. So we have two of those, one on each side. The arm has a humerus and a radius and an ulnar, okay? Um, so your radius pulse is here, right? It's on the side of your radius, and ulnar pulse is on the other side. So that is pretty much the two bones of your forearm. Radius and humerus is the big bone up here. And then your hand has carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. Well, the carpals in the wrist, metacarpals are extending into the hand, and then you have the phalanges, which are your fingers. So then we have here the individual illustrations of the ulnar and the radius bones, and where it's connected in the neck, and where you can have identifiable marks of breakages if you had to identify where did he break his ulnar. You could say at the neck, right? You could say in the body or the radius, right? So those are pretty good things to remember as on the anatomical portion. Primarily, they just want you to know on your bones that you have a humerus, you have a radius, and you have an ulnar, right? That you have phalanges, you have capillals, metacarpals as well, and that you have two clavicles and two scapula. So that's pretty self-explanatory. So we'll go. These are the rest of the bones that you need to be familiar with. You find clear illustrations in your book. The pelvic cradle is three bones. They work together. The ilium, the ischium, and the pubis, uh, and they work together to form the cradle that holds our pubic area together. And as you know, the bladder is there, and the the corpus for males, and the female organella is there as well. Uh, there's in the cradle, and then you have the rectum as well as also there. So that's like in the cradle. But the most of the thing you got to understand, the cradle holds our legs so that we can walk, and you can imagine the muscles needed to get us in an upright position. Uh, and the longest bone is the femur, and that's in our leg, and it's quite dense, and it's very strong. So that's connected to the pelvic cradle. Then you have the lower leg, the tibia and the fibula, smaller than the tibia. Uh, that's the fibula, small. And then you have the patella, which is your kneecap, which is the joint between the femur and the tibia and the fibula. So it's pretty neat, the kneecap. And then there are the ankle, or the seven tarsal bones on your ankle. Then you have the foot. The foot has the metatarsals, which is connected to the ankle bones, and the phalanges, the toes. And again, phalanges are also on your hands, your fingers. So, understanding these common anatomical terms will help and assist you in locating your injuries and relating to your fellow medical staff and to your patients. So, this concludes pretty much this lesson, and I'll have a closing statement for you shortly. After discussing the phalanges of the toes, which is the end of the structure of the skeleton, uh, most distal portion away from your throat, away from the body. And so we're at a conclusion at the end of the lesson. So I always like to leave the students with some reference materials. Um, in your lesson plans in Blackboard, you have a prompt that you can click on. It's called Faculty Availability, and it can get you to the information you need to contact your primary instructor for any one-on-one uh, lessons that you can have, or any questions you may have directly to your professor. All right, and then you have uh, the book, which is online, and it's embedded on the internet, and you can get access it through the reading material. And it has you click on read the text, and you go right into to Cengage, is what the name of the computer program is, and it goes right into the book, and it has a search prompt. You can put in the keywords that you wish to find, and it will search the entire book for you. and you will find numerous articles and writings in the book and illustrations concerning that matter. Then my favorite, and the one that I think that we should all use, is the UMA library. The UMA library is exactly what it means. It's a library. It's an online library. It has everything from textbooks to journals to photographs to illustrations to charts um, and videos concerning numerous subject matters. And you can use that at your leisure to enhance your learning experience. Once again, it was great to be your instructor during this slide program, and I'm wishing you all the very best. And good luck